Hi everyone, it's Christina of CraftyPaws. I'm here to share with you guys the process video on how I made this pillow shadow box ornament with diamond dies. This is a design team project where I used lots of previous releases. I used the star, the smallest one from the nesting star die set. I used the deer trio. I used the stag and the fawn. I used the grass border die. I use the smaller Christmas tree die, and I use the smaller 2 of the 3 pine tree dies, as well as the Labels 1 nesting die set to create this ornament. And if you guys are interested in maybe making a simplified version of this without so much coloring, I think the Diamond Dies Build a Snowman die set would be great fun for a little scene inside. And I also think using the stars from the Christmas ornament die or the light set, maybe the smaller ones, to fill up the inside of a shadow box ornament like this, it would be really fun and easy to create beautiful ornaments. If you guys are making a purchase at Diamond Dies, please consider using the coupon code ThanksChristina. For orders of $35 or more, you'll get 10% off plus free worldwide shipping. I'm using some bright Shimmers red cardstock. I love that shimmer to it for holiday projects, and I've cut the cardstock down to 6 inches across by 5 5/8 inches. And I'm just following the normal directions for making a pillow box using the We Are Memory Keepers pillow box punch board. And it's basically lining it up where they tell you to, punching, scoring, and going down and scoring. Now, I'll show you here exactly where to line it up. It's right along that little pointed piece, punching, scoring along the arch, scoring along the down area, punching again after moving it over, scoring, and that last punch and score. So you can see that it creates 2 segments and a shorter segment, which will be the tab. I'm cutting away the excess top and bottom pieces on that tab section, and now I'm just folding the pillow box along the fold lines. Now, in order to create the background for the inside part of the ornament that's going to be created like a shadow box, I'm cutting a piece of white cardstock, and that piece is 2.5 inches by 4 5/8 inches, and I'm lining it up not along the top of the punch board, but just along where the little lines meet, so that at the top it just creates the same arch that the pillow box main outside area creates. And I'll just hand fussy cut those arches out, and that will make it so that this inside liner piece will fit perfectly into the back area of the pillow box. Now, just to get some background color down, I'm using some Tim Holtz Distress ink in Tumbled Glass and Mowed Lawn. And I'm starting, as you can see, off of that little piece of cardstock that I've cut and blending onto toward the center of the cardstock. And that creates a nice soft blended look with a blending tool. I'm going to do about 1/3 of the top of this cardstock piece with the blue, and then I'm going to do the bottom 2/3 in the green. And that's just kind of basically laying out the sky and the ground area in that background scene I'm going to be creating. Now here you see me using the Diamond Dies Labels 1 nesting die, and that's just to create the window on this shadow box that we're creating. And it's easily cut out. And then I also want to create a fancy frame. So I'm going to be using that same die and a slightly larger die from the same set. And I'm creating a little frame from gold glitter cardstock. Because this cardstock is extra thick, I'm using just an extra piece of copy paper as a shim to make sure that the cutting lines of those dies cut through, and it did really cleanly. You also saw that I cut out an extra little star. That's the smallest in the Diamond Dies Stars nesting die set. That's just a decorative touch I'm going to add later. Now I'm using my favorite wet glue, this is the Art Glitter Glue, to attach that frame around that opening on the pillow box. I've die cut some pine trees. This is from the Diamond Dies pine tree die set and the smaller Christmas tree die from Diamond Dies. And I'm doing some quick coloring just using a blending tool with my Mowed Lawn Distress ink. And I'm leaving the bottom trunks plain at this point because I'm going to be using a small chalk applicator, you see there, with Tim Holtz Distress ink in Gathered Twigs. Those chalk applicators are great for getting into little small spaces with inks and coloring really easily. I think some dollar stores might have something similar to this, like in the makeup section. Mine didn't, so I picked this up at Joann's using a 40% off coupon. Now you might have been thinking those little applicators were really unnecessary, but here you're going to see me color up these two deer from the Diamond Dies Deer Trio set. And it's the male deer and the female deer. And here I'm using the applicator to color up the antlers of that male stag. And that's done with antique linen. Then I'm using tea dye to color up, just marking in kind of the darker areas of the stag. And you can see I'm picking out the hind or backside legs and the bottom parts of the ears, the under part of the tail, and along the back. And I'll be adding more and more color to this, so you're not going to see so much white in it, but I wanted to tell you guys how I think about coloring up die cuts like this. Here you see me going along the back side of that back hind leg, and I'm blending down toward the belly and toward the neck, but I'm leaving some areas almost white because that's actually how deer or stag are colored. Now, you see a little piece of scratch paper there under my hand, and that's where I dab off right after I add more ink to those little applicators. And that's just so I don't get a really harsh color onto the little die cut piece. Now I'm adding a slightly darker tone. This is Gathered Twigs, so that the stag looks a little darker, more robust. Now I'm coloring in the face a little bit more with tea dye, adding a little more shading to the legs, adding the Gathered Twigs to the hooves, so that's a little bit darker. And you can see that adding these little bits of color really add to the three-dimensional look of this die cut. I'm going back in with the darker Gathered Twigs and shading back in again those legs on the back side of the stag. And that just shows kind of the placement of the legs, because the die cut by itself obviously doesn't show that. I'm using Gathered Twigs, the distress marker, just to simply draw in eyes. And I'm going to use Fired Brick for the nose, but then ultimately I end up punching out a tiny little nose with a hole punch so that it has a little bit of dimension. I'm using a scrap from the Red Shimmers paper, and I've used a 1/16 inch hole punch to punch out a tiny little circle that I can place on top of that nose to add just a tiny detail of shimmer and to highlight the fact that this stag is Rudolph. And now I'm using a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen to add some spots onto the stag's back. And I'm also going to be using this pen to add some white highlights in the underside of the stag's tail, as well as in the ears of the stag. Now just to go through again and show you another coloring, I'm coloring up the female deer, again using the chalk sponge applicators and laying in the shadow of the legs that are on the back side of this deer with Tim Holtz Distress ink in tea dye, and on the back sides of both of the front legs as well. Using these tiny sponge applicators really helps get into those nooks and crannies while also leaving the highlighted white areas. It allows for blending. I just love these little applicators. I'll put a link in the description box below if I can find a place to buy them online as well. Anyway, I'm coloring up the face here, Again, I'm leaving the area in the chest more white this time so that it looks like the white areas of a deer. I'm leaving the underside of the tail white, as well as the belly and the back sides of each of the legs as much as I can, even while getting the back legs on the back side of the deer more shadowed. Again, I'm using the distress marker in Gathered Twigs to draw in the eyes and the nose. And again, I'm using a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen to draw in the spots on the back of this fawn, as well as highlight the underside of the tail, as well as inside the ears. Now I'm going to share with you guys just a little bit of the scene assembly. I'm gluing on some of these pine trees in the background, and anything that hangs off of the card liner, so to speak, I'm going to have to snip off so that the pillow box can properly close. I'm adding some of the trees using some dimensionals so that the shadow box has more dimension inside the scene. Here you see me adding to the foreground here on the front of this shadow box, a little strip of the Diamond Die's grass border die. And I'm just laying in on the background scene as well, another row of that grass, just positioning it so that it will layer nicely behind that front piece. And I'm not too worried about that bottom area showing because it's going to be so deep inside the shadow box. And here you see me cutting off the excess on that back panel. I'm adding a little dimension with this little pine tree up on the front. And unfortunately, some of my video got cut off and lost here, so you don't see me assembling everything, but you'll see at the end how I added the fawn inside the scene, and then I added the stag on the front of the ornament outside of the little window or shadow box opening. You can obviously decorate the inside of your shadow box ornament any way you'd like. I have another idea that I'm listing in my blog post if you're interested. You basically assemble the rest of the pillow box, shadow box the normal way, except at the top you punch out a hole. I'm using a 1/8 inch hole punch, and I'm just taking some red satin ribbon, putting both ends through the hole from the front, and then I'll tie a knot on the back with both ends, and basically that allows the loop from which the ornament is going to be hung to not go through that little hole. And basically you just pop down the flaps and there's your finished ornament. I added a couple of extra little finishing touches. I die cut out a star for the center top part of the opening there. That's from the Diamond Die's star nesting die set. And then I just decided to add a little bow with another piece of the satin red ribbon. I hope you enjoyed this pillow shadow box ornament tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys are having a wonderful crafty day.